Okay, so we'll get started. So, firstly, thank you very much for all of you that have attended, and hopefully we'll drop onto this and pick this up as it will be recorded in the future. Me, myself, Andy, Nath are on the call as well, and the other coaches at XNRG are really excited to sort of bring you this series. Something we thought would be, really great to give back to the ultra running community. A community which is so great and friendly and helps us get to so many different places as we go. It was really something we wanted to give back and be able to share some knowledge with you that obviously from our backgrounds and experiences to help you achieve your next big goals. That's the sort of welcome from myself. My name's James. If you haven't met me before, haven't seen me on the social media, and my background is in exercise physiology and coaching a range of different sports, and now specializing in ultra endurance and endurance events. I'll hand it over just for a sec to either Andy or Nate, whichever one of you wants to go first, just to give a quick introduction as well.
Nate, please.
No, yeah. Hi, good evening, guys, and welcome, obviously, on behalf of XNRG from me. I'm Nathan Montague, ultra distance, I would say, veteran, but I come from a teaching coaching background, and the experience led anecdotally, scientifically, and through myself from in leading athletes and supporting them, moving them forwards, and pursuing my own goals still as we move on into the future.
Thanks,
Nathan, you said veteran. I'm 54, everybody, knocking 55, so I'm a real vet in this pack. MDS, Rig of Fire, multi-days, some 100-milers. Started running ultras when I was 40, started running when I was 30. So yeah, I'd be the completer rather than the competer of this pack. Over to you, James.
Excellent. So to this evening, obviously, again, thank you very much for spending your time with us. Just a brief overview of sort of the areas that we're going to cover. Obviously, it's titled for this one, Understanding Race Demands. So to begin with, we're going to look at what is it that you're actually entering yourself for. If you've done another one or you've done them in the past, every ultra is different, and that's what we love about them so much here at XNRG. What changes physically and what changes technically, and how can you implement those in order to succeed? The second point we're going to look at is an effective way to problem solve, or at least get to the start line using a working backwards approach. We're going to look at collecting small and big W's in order to help you come race day. And we're also going to look at a bit of an overview of how to put it together into a plan, touching on a few points to hopefully help you structure a little bit better working towards your next race or goal. So first starting point is to talk about what is it you're actually doing. We know that a marathon is a set distance. We know that a 10K on the road is a set distance. We know that from experience, we are going to come across something's very similar. We know that the terrain's going to be similar and the training structure is going to be similar. However, that's what makes ultras so great, doesn't it? The fact that you really don't know what's going to come up, and there's such a variety of places, experiences, and things to come. This can range from the hot sort of environments to forest to, as we can see on here, the Comrades, which is a road-based ultra. And I think the things to think about here is the distance to begin with. What is it that you're actually entering for? Is it a 50-kilometer? Is it a multi-stage 300-kilometer race over a set period of days? And that changes dramatically the physiology not only required, but also to how to train for that. The distance is going to change the heart rate. From the literature, we know that the longer races are going to be run at a lower intensity and a lower heart rate. Why that is? That could be for numerous reasons. That could be because we perceive the event to be longer, we pace ourselves better and run at a lower heart rate. Or it could be that due to the duration of the event, we know that physiologically we can't sustain a higher heart rate for over a period amount of time. So does the body naturally lower that heart rate? I think the other things to think about here, going on to the sort of intensity, is what is it that's going to impact on the later stages of the race if you run or start too hard? Now, that's a consideration which is very, very difficult to plan other than understanding what it is the race entails. What climbs are you going to come onto, which we're going to look at in a few minutes? What aid stations are required? What is it that you are required to carry for that event? There's so many different thoughts and processes to think about in order to get to that start line in the best prepared possible position. And we're going to explore and go into some detail with some of these as we go. The other point to think about is the terrain. Like, I know Andy on the call, he's completed MDS in the sand dunes. Now that is going to pose itself, without the climate, a very different position and demand running in that terrain compared to, as we can see, the comrades on the road. What is it you're actually going to be doing? What's underfoot, and how can you plan for that foot-wise and equipment-wise? How can you replicate these conditions into your training if you don't live in the desert, if you don't live in technical terrain? How can we go about that? The other thing to really think about is how this changes physiologically. Racing in the heat is going to put extra thermic stress on the body, which some people might look at like, oh, okay, I'm running in the heat. However, it's going to be an additional stress as if you were running up an incline, for example. It's going to place different demands on the body, and therefore it's really important that we consider that not only in our training, but in come race day. So I think the other things to think about are the climate. Okay, we've touched on a little bit of this. There aren't too many races other than going abroad, especially in this country, that are at altitude. However, if you're going to do an event which is at altitude, normally we classify at altitude above 2,000 meters of elevation. That's going to limit the oxygen demands or the oxygen availability in the air. Now, we know that oxygen is really required, especially for our ultra endurance sport. It's done at a lower intensity. Everything is mainly done aerobically, other than maybe a few climbs. So if there is less oxygen or O2 in the air, obviously that is going to limit the amount that we can utilize. So again, another real consideration into what it is that you're actually coming up against. Every event can be different, and there are no two times that you will race the event that they might be the same conditions. So even the same event year on year could change. So as a case, look at the worst case scenarios is a really good starting point. If, for example, you know the conditions at worst are this temperature for the Sahara Desert, make sure you're prepared for that. Don't go in thinking, oh, it might not be hot this year, because it could be hot. And then that's when the real telltales come out. So looking onto these a little bit deeper, okay, we've touched on the environment, now the distance intensity. Hopefully some of these are about straightforward. If you're experienced ultramarathon runners or have ran a few before, these are considerations which you might have already thought about. Okay, the first one that you should start to think about when you enter that race. Next one we're going to look at is the elevation profile. Now, this for me is a real key one, depending on obviously the race you're at, but can really make or break the race preparation and come race day, that intensity. We know that running up a hill is going to be harder. It's going to place a higher oxygen demand on the body, okay, just because we are going up the hill. However, other things to consider is downhill running. Are you prepared to have a steep downhill on a technical section? Downhill running greater than a 20% gradient, okay, is a really nice figure. I tried not to use much text in this presentation. However, I've got an equation here. I don't really can see with the mouse, with a little bit of text that actually, as you can see, running downhill over 20% gradient actually makes you less efficient. So the cost of running is greater than running on the flat. Therefore, you've also got to consider the downhills in your event. Okay, not only is there going to be a greater oxygen need and intensity on the uphills, they're also on the descents, and that's something not to be missed.
James, can I just chip with a question?
Of course.
Well, so one question from two perspectives. How would you approach, say, for example, UTMB from an elite perspective, and then from someone like me, more of a completer perspective in terms of looking at that elevation trace?
I think UTMB is a really good example. See, for those that aren't familiar, it's an ultra demanding race. You know, the fact that you're on this call, I should imagine you will have probably heard of it because it is one of the biggest in our sort of community in sport. And it's got over 10,000 meters of elevation, lots of that on technical terrain. So I think it's a really good point, Andy, you make, and it's a consideration you've got to make about what intensity is you're going to run at the start and on those climbs. One, in order to maintain that intensity for the duration of the event, and also to meet the cutoff times if you are looking at that sort of to complete the race side of it. So I think it comes down to, and we're going to touch on in a second, the preparation. How can you replicate these conditions into your training so that you know come race day on the climbs, this is the speed that you can hold in order so that when you do come onto the flat, you can hold this pace in order to meet your cutoff times. Really important to trust the process, trust your training, and know that you've sort of got those small wins, which we will look at come race day, that you know in your process, if you need to walk this climb, that's fine, because when it comes to this flat section, you can run at said pace to meet the cutoff time of 5 hours at that checkpoint. Does that answer a little bit, Andy?
That's brilliant. You gave me approval to walk, which is awesome. Thank you.
Excellent. And I think that's, you know, a real key point of part of walking and understanding the demands. Not all events and not all climbs are runnable, and even if they are runnable, it's not the wisest decision. It's all about maintaining the intensity that you can sustain at the highest amount, but for the longest duration period. If you spike above, when it's on another chat, we're going to look a little bit at our lactate zones and different running zones. But if we cause our body to spike and work above an intensity that we are able to, it's going to cause lasting effects. It's almost like, imagine the analogy of having a water balloon, and you're going to have a pin. Every time you spike that intensity too much, you put in a pin in the balloon. That water's going to come out. It's got to go somewhere. It's not just going to fill up again. Okay? Every time you do that, you're causing a deterioration of something that might happen later on in the race. So yeah, it's a really good point to make with that. Touching just on the other points as well, kit lists and nutrition. I suppose these sort of come hand in hand. Now, this kit list here is one that I pulled from one of our XNRG races that we hold. And kit lists are becoming more and more important. There's becoming more awareness on the fact that we're having sort of some accidents in certain ultra races, and you know, good race organisers should now be at least making you carry and checking the necessities in order to have that bit there for adverse weather conditions and things that might change. So how are you going to carry that kit? Okay, what bag size do you need in order to fit it in? Have you practiced? And this is a key one for me. I don't know about yourself, Nathan, Andy, from experiences, but being able to get your coat in and out your bag whilst on the move. Okay, the coat is a real key one. Weather can change so rapidly. Yes, you might be able to stop and put on a base layer, but if the rain comes, the rain comes, and that is being able to just access that and put it back in the bag whilst on the move in order to not lose time. So I think, you know, considering the kit list, how you're going to pack it, what do you need in order to carry it and meet the kit list, and also finding out what kit is essential beyond the kit list. Now, if you're doing a multi-stage race, you might need to carry more, but what is essential, and have you tried it? I think Nathan and Andy would agree from sort of experience. make sure that you have tried that kit come race day, but come 2 weeks before. We're going to have a look at a little bit of a timeline of structuring things to finish off this evening. But for me, you need to have tested that kit 4 weeks before, so that if it doesn't work, you've got time to go out and buy another one. No point 2 weeks before and then needing it to be next day, and then you're on your taper period, and actually you're not going to do a long run with that kit anymore because you don't need it. So consider your kit, okay? Don't underestimate what you need to carry and how the event and those demands that we've spoke about so far can influence the kit required.
Actually, getting, sorry, James, with your sack full with your kit, so it doesn't rattle and annoy you, and or even worse, rub your back.
Yeah, no, definitely. If you are going to, me personally, I have sort of an anti-chafe cream that I use and works for me. But that's something that I've tried and know that works with the clothing and bag I wear, so that it sits nicely and I don't get any rubbing throughout the races that I've had so far this year. So last couple of things I suppose to think about, nutrition. Okay, so we are going to have another talk. One is going to be with the coping with heat as well. I don't know whether you've seen that, which will be really interesting. Go a little bit deeper into some of these points. And another one, we're going to have some touches on nutrition as well, with Nate leading later in the series. However, touching on it now, okay, do you know what nutrition brand your event is using? Do you get on with it? Okay, there's so much around this. If you do get on with it and you've tried it, then it could mean that you're actually going to have to carry 500 grams less in your sack because actually you get on with what they're providing. If you don't and you need to carry it, okay, then that's fine. But be prepared to carry those extra 10, 15 gels, bars, pieces of whatever it's sandwiches that you might be using. So really think about what it is that you've got on offer, what you need. Okay, we're going to touch a little bit more on that as far as carbohydrates required for endurance, and we'll touch on that more. But today, obviously, we're talking about those demands. So what is it in order to reach your best performance that you need? Okay, where are those aid stations? How far in are they? Are you carrying enough hydration and fluid in order to meet the next aid station without being completely empty, and you're actually competing in 30-degree weather? So really consider these points, okay? Today it's all about thinking, taking away these messages, and how to then implement into the plan. Nathan and Andy, would you like me to touch any more on sort of the efficiency of running, or do you think that sort of that's quite self-explanatory? We can always have some more questions at the end.
Yeah, that's kind of self-explanatory. That's very. What was significantly interesting, and I hope it was for you guys out there, was the downhill running experience and the energy demands of that compared to the flats when it goes above a certain percentage. We always think of the downs as relatively saving or saving time or saving energy, but actually we all know the impact of running downhill and technical downhills, the impact on the muscles, etc. But also what was significant, what James has relayed, is the oxygen demands at certain percentage levels greater than that of running on the flat, and that's really significant.
Yeah, I think it's you mentioned two really important words there as well for downhill running. It's something which, if you do struggle with it, again, might be one of your priorities in this process. But muscle damage, two words which really stand out with association with that downhill running, and that is something which potentially, going back to earlier, knowing that intensity that you can maintain. Potentially, there's not enough research on it yet, but that downhill running and that muscle damage could decrease your running efficiency. And that could be one of the reasons. So potentially, if you could improve your sort of muscle recruitment running downhill and your coping strategy with running downhill, potentially your running efficiency might not decrease so much throughout the race. So I wanted to stick this on here. Again, we will touch more into the science in the episode with all things science. However, I think it's a really good point and something I've added on here. So for those of you that aren't aware of anything sciencey or haven't come across anything like this before, this equation, it looks complicated, but really it is what comes down to endurance performance. So there are three things without overcomplicating it. One, for those of you that understand what it is your oxygen or your VO2 max, which is, to keep it simple, the amount of oxygen you can take in and utilize through the muscles per minute. Okay, some of you might have seen numbers now. Your Garmin shows an estimated. It's you know, quite well known, that number. The other number is what percentage can you maintain at that. So again, we will talk more about training zones and intensity in one of the prequels to this webinar. But what intensity can you maintain? For example, I could have a very, very high VO2 max. However, I can only utilize 50% of that. Whereas Andy might have a lower VO2 max, but can utilize 90% of his VO2 max, which he can sustain. And therefore, he might potentially have a better performance because of that.
Economies of effort, yeah.
And then the other one is our efficiency. And as Nace just said, our economy, which we've touched on so far about that downhill running, and could be our running form, things that you can do in the gym. And that is our other influencing factor. So those three influencing factor basically underpin endurance performance. However, I have sort of raised the questions here on whether or not technical planning can actually influence that just as much. Whether or not addressing the demands required can actually have just as much impact on your performance come race day as that developing your fitness and aerobic engine that you might commonly associate with endurance performance. You might even already see it. You turn up to some races and you think, cool, that person doesn't look like they're going to do very well. Yet they do. Maybe it's because of that technical planning. Maybe it is because they know what they're capable of and they know how to execute their race the best that they can come race day. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. Happy to open the floor for more sort of in-depth questions at the end. If you also would like, the Q&A button, just worth mentioning now, is at the bottom. Throughout, don't feel like you have to wait till the end. Please put in some questions in there that we can answer, and obviously Nate and Andy are very kindly going to organise them and go through some of those that we can answer at the end. So please feel free to ask as we go, and we can address those as well. So now looking at it from the backwards approach. Okay, this is something that I and I know Nate uses as well. I'm not quite sure so much with Andy, with some of his clients and athletes, but it's something that, you know, is really sort of crucial in order to come race day or meet that goal and make sure that we've met those demands that are required. So there's sort of two parts to this slide and two parts that I wanted to touch on. One is looking at it like a dual-pronged approach. This half is fitness you. This half is intervention and technical planning you. They interfere with each other, okay? If you're doing some heat acclimation work, as we've discussed, heat is a stress on the body. If you're putting yourself in a sauna or the steam room for 30 minutes, okay, 3 times a week, that is going to impact on your ability to do some runs and do some sessions. So you can't just have this approach of, I will put in my technical planning wherever I fancy it. Come race day, oh, I forgot to do that. I'm going to stick that in there. And also today I'm going to do my 5-hour long run. It won't work. This is where the backwards approach comes in. What is most important fitness-wise for you? It might be that you're doing a really long steady race with lots of climbing and walking, and your intensity and heart rate, you know, is going to be low. So build that aerobic engine, build that base fitness, which you are going to tap into on race day, and understand what it feels like to move at 15 minutes per mile. Understand what it might feel like to run at 10 minutes per mile if that's your pace. Okay? Understand that fitness side that you need to work on. And that is one side of the main training. The other side, as I say, is the intervention. Now, in order to meet as many or all of the ones that you require, it's going to take some good planning. Some interventions and training interventions and technical interventions last a few weeks. Okay, we will touch more, as I said, looking at the heat acclimation work. That's the sort of initial ones for myself that come to mind that you might commonly associate with people going to a heat chamber or going into the sauna a few weeks before their event in order to prepare for the heat. But as I said, this is going to impact the fitness unit. So it's really important to, one, understand the hierarchy, which comes on to my next image, of things which are critical for you and the race. For example, if the race, you know, you're going to have to carry a large amount of kit because it's a multi-stage race. If you know the conditions are going to be hot. If you know that there's going to need your magic wands, as I call them, or your walking poles or running poles, okay? Understand that those are your priority interventions, and those need to fit in the most impactful time of your training program or training plan. Don't leave them until the last minute and then think, oh, actually, I'm going to sack that one off because now I need to plan my longest run and my last training camp. When actually that might not have had or might not have as much impact on your performance, being that fitness side, as the intervention was that you had originally planned. So again, the points to touch on here is they interfere with each other. So planning is required, and prioritize all of these demands. Write down as soon as you've entered your race, or if you're already entered for a race, okay, write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 10, however many points it might be. The list is greater than the ones that we are going to cover today. As I said, every race is different. Every race you can snowball on, but prioritize them. If it's going to MDS, okay, I would say the heat is very important. I'm sure Andy would agree with me, and he's going to talk a lot more about his experiences later in the series. If it is, you know, going to be a cold environment, as one of our other coaches, Neil, as you know, might well know, has been very successful in the past with his event in the cold, and a very long and hard multi-stage event. I'm sure he would agree that training and getting used to being cold is going to be very important on that list. So prioritize, okay? We all have lives, we all have jobs, unfortunately, that we have to carry on with, as well as our training. So prioritize, okay? Our time is important. So I put this little image on because I imagine this is what I look like at the end of my 24-hour race in the dark with my head torch, running along, wishing that you had done that extra little bit of research and training. So coming on to collecting these W's. What do I mean by collecting small W's? So I term small W's as small wins, easy wins that you can put in that swag bag and come race day, delve into, okay? Not only is that going to help you physically, it's going to help you with your mental preparation. Now, we're going to have a really nice talk from Neil, who I've just mentioned, later on towards the end of the series about our mental strategies and mental coping during races. But think of this as your physical prep in order to help your mental prep. And they do interlink massively. Your small W's are going to be meeting these demands. So it could be a series of work on technical terrain. You're going to put 4 weekends of your training plan that you're actually going to drive a little bit of distance in order to meet the demands and practice on that technical terrain with those wizard poles, Okay, no point getting them out of the box 4 weeks before your event, because you're not going to be efficient with them. You're not going to know how to get them out your bag. All right, if you do want to use things like that, then make sure we're prepared. Another point, just to touch on that, is where you are located. Going back to some of those demands. Like for me, I'm from Leicestershire. Okay, my biggest incline in one go is sort of a 5-minute climb on about 12%. Now, if I wanted to go and do a mountainous race, which I am doing later this year, I can't train for that in the natural environment. However, that's when you need to be clever and use your initiative. How many of us have access to a gym or a treadmill that goes up to 15, now some of them 20% gradient? Can we replicate how long that vertical climb is, not only in its gradient, but in time? What does it feel like coming off the back of a 20-minute incline at 15%? How do the legs feel? How does the body respond going over the top? Think about all those points and how you can utilize different interventions, such as sort of a treadmill, in order to meet those demands. That come race day, when you're looking like this, running up your 14th hill at 15% and you're 6 minutes up your 20-minute climb, okay, you know that you can maintain this speed and run off the top, okay, because you've done it. Don't leave anything to chance come race day, okay? And this is what I mean by selecting these small wins in order to meet the big win, which is your big W come race day.
Just a question on wins. When you're at the start line, do you know which win in your head you're going to use at one point in the race?
I think you can think back to that. I think on your start line, you're utilizing probably a lot of them. Now, on the start line itself, for myself, I don't know about you that are on the call, and Andy and Nathan, but you're very focused. You're thinking in the moment. However, I think a lot in the 24 hours leading up to the race. And that is where the small wins help calm you. That is where you can think back on those training interventions, think back on that training block you've had. Okay, we're going to look in a second about periodization, but it's a really nice way to look back and think, yes, I've done that, and I did that in June because that was on my training program and that went well. Okay, I know that, when this time does come, and it's probably going to be more in the moment thoughts compared to on the start line, but I know when I'm coming up to 2 hours into my event and my nutrition is going well, that's good because I practice that and I know I can take on 90 grams of carbs per hour and I know that my stomach's going to be fine. And that's a small win that I will pluck out at that time point. But I think on the start line for myself, other people might be different. I'm very focused and worrying about what's about to come up rather than thinking about the small wins themselves at that time frame. Don't know about yourself, Nate. This weekend, or this week, you've just had a very long multi-stage race. Is there on the start line? Were you thinking about what was coming up, or were you thinking about what you've done and how to help utilize that in the race?
Just like you said, is you're on the start line. You're very focused on just what's going to come up ahead, and the small wins on what I call the moments of exposure that you've had in training, they subconsciously come out during the event. So for example, when you're going up a long climb, or if you've been working really hard on your descents or technical descents, as I did, it comes out when you're on that technical descent. You work out, and that small win is then gained. But you need those wins based in terms of the training and your preparation, and then they're able to almost like pull out of the draws, call them resilience draws, that you're able to pull out, open up, and then it is accessible for you when you need them during the run.
Excellent. So So we're just going to touch a little bit now more on the planning phase, how to sort of integrate them. We're going to look a little bit of an overview of how you can structure some of the little bit of a build up towards race day. Now, I'm not expecting you all to have a very technical and detailed plan as this. This is something that I've worked on with an athlete in the past. However, what is periodization? We're going to touch and use this just as a bit of a graphic in order to meet those demands come race day. So periodization is basically, and I put a little bit of a description here, but it's breaking down the plan in order to meet everything that you require. Okay, so it's having specific phases, all right, in order to address different points, because we can't do everything at once, as we've just mentioned. Okay, the other good or really useful point of periodization and planning ahead using a backwards approach from race day in order to prevent overtraining, but it still allows those overreaching periods that you've planned for. It might be that on a big training block, okay, you know it's going to be slightly too much for you. You know that you're pushing yourself and getting what it feels like running fatigued, doing back-to-back long runs, which is a common method. However, you're going to then compensate for that for the next training block or the next few days and allow enough recovery to do that. You can't do everything at once. You can't hit high training volume all the time, okay? Otherwise it is going to cause overtraining and that is going to lead to an injury risk. Another really nice factor just wanted to link in here is something talking of recovery sleep. Okay, it's really well established that getting less than sort of 7 hours sleep per night increases the chance of an injury, a muscular injury, by 1.7 times. Okay, just think about that. If you're constantly getting less than 7 hours sleep, which is difficult around work, training, balancing, think about how and what that could potentially be doing in the long run in the build up to that race. Is that going to help you sustain the larger training volume, or actually are you overdoing it slightly too much? So use a plan is what I'm getting at here. Keep it simple, but use a plan. What is it come race day? What is the date of race day? And how long do you need to be ticking off these things, knowing what you've coming up? You could have a holiday coming up. We're all human, okay? So plan that into your training plan. Know that actually on holiday, you might be working on some interventions because you're going somewhere hot. It might be that you utilize that experience in order to meet some of the demands which you might not have access to back in the UK. So this is sort of the last part of the presentation before opening up the floor and having some questions and going into anything in more detail that people would like. But there's a simple timeline, okay? The phrase here, planning wins every time, it really does in ultra running. Okay, you might get away with it at a marathon if you've been doing it for 20 years. And actually, you know that in 6 months' time, you know what a marathon feels like because you've done it. You know it's on the road, you know it's pretty flat, and you know that there's going to be water and the standard aid stations. But each ultra event is different, okay? And that is something really, really to consider. Come race day, okay? I mean, we're happy to talk about this a little bit more, as I said, but I personally use with my athletes and myself a sort of 2-week sort of start to taper period where you will keep the intensity high, but your training volume will decrease. Okay, that's going to allow ample recovery come race day, but keep the training stimulus in order for you not to decrease any fitness benefits over the last 6 months, year, however long it is that you've been training for this event. I've also put a real topic at the moment for the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, it goes for any illness, but don't get COVID those last 4 weeks, okay? If you need to, wear a mask if you work in a busy environment, working with lots of people, okay? Don't feel like you have to just because society norms now say that, okay, COVID doesn't exist. You've been training for 12 months for this event. Those last 4 weeks, be a bit selfish, okay? If it means wearing a mask at work because you work on a busy reception, then do it. Use a screen if you need. Have hand sanitizer. And I've always used the foaming hand sanitizers because they're actual coverage of the hands and actually be able to kill bacteria and other viruses on skin contact actually has a greater success rate than the gel alone. Okay, so these are really considerations, especially if you're traveling. If you're going to go on a plane and you're racing abroad, what are you going to do to prepare and have that to hand? Okay, when going through customs, when you're touching lots and lots of things, because it might be that you're going out a week before race day, and actually the illness incubates for 4 or 5 days, and then it comes out 2 weeks before race day, and you've just spent 12 months preparing for that. So be a little bit selfish and think, even coming up to the travel, what you're doing. Here I've put about 4 weeks for a training camp is something I would go off. If it's not a training camp and you can't get to the venue, obviously it's difficult if you're racing abroad or somewhere that's a long distance away. We all, like I said, are limited by time and money these days, and petrol that seems to keep going up and up and up. How are you going to meet those demands? It could be that you use this period to do that treadmill running, to replicate the demands, replicate those times, and understand what it feels like. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be going to the venue, but that normally coincides with the highest amount of volume in your training. Okay, make sure you're not doing your longest long run 2 weeks before race day, because you will still be recovering. Okay, make sure you give yourself enough time. And that comes into the kit. I know we've touched on this a lot about our bag and everything else that we might need, but make sure your kit's sorted. On that last long run that you might do, or last training camp, ideal time to try out everything. Give you enough time afterwards if things don't work, if your shoes don't give you enough traction on the terrain that you might want, enough time to order a new pair, change brand, and still have enough time to go out on enough runs and understand whether they're going to work for you. Okay, so really important. Another thing to really touch on kit is something that I learned in my studies a long time ago, is actually looking at your bag and how that restricts your breathing. Okay, so there are a lot of studies that are now out there which people can go and have a look at in more detail, but that actually restricts the lung function, having a tight bag. Is your bag so tight because of the extra coat and layers that you've crammed in the back, and it's only designed to hold 5 litres, that actually it's going to make your lung function difficult, and come towards the end of the race, you're restricting your breathing. So again, just another example of why it's so important to test kit and make sure that you've tested those demands. So I've just sort of highlighted a couple of points on these sort of blobs on the timeline. Nothing specific at all, and that's why I put a question mark, but these could be points on that periodized timeline or timeline approach plan that you address some of these demands. So it could be that one of these training blocks, okay, you look at your nutrition testing, you try out different strategies, you try out some fasted runs in order to improve your fat oxidation rate. But coming up to race day, this is your specific phase, okay? This is where you want to make sure you have got everything come race day in that swag bag, going up the mountain in the dark, all right? Make sure that in this phase you address any last things that you might require. So thank you very much for listening so far, okay? Hopefully that has been interesting for you, and hopefully that's given you some thought or some food for thought to go away and think about in preparation for the next event. I would like to open up the question and answer now a little bit more, and Nathan, Andy, if you've got any to start us off, please start, and we can sort of go a little bit deeper, or however you guys would like to sort of direct these last bit of the call. Doesn't necessarily have to be for myself as well. If you wanted to ask Andy and Nate, please reach out and do that now.
There are no actual questions up yet, guys, but I would just go over what you said there with nutrition, James. You know, every long run, whichever day you choose for your long run, that's when you should be choosing going through your race nutrition, just a habit, really. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, sorry, Nate, go on. You talk first.
Yeah, I was saying, that this is that this comes from top sports nutritionist and in particular running and ultra distance nutritionist Rennie McGregor, and it's about the significance of training the gut for preparation for the activity. So you may okay, so you can get by on your 2-hour run without the need for a gel or a bar or 500 mils of Tailwind or whatever product. However, you're preparing the gut by training with a microcosm or a micro amount of that activity. So let's product. So let's say 250 mils or half a bar or whatever you're using during that run to train your gut, because there's obviously a blood redistribution from the working muscles to the gut as you're going. So I think that's really significant.
Yeah, I think, again, as you sort of mentioned, and also just palatability of your food.
Yeah, true, definitely.
What is it that you're actually taking? I've gone through so many different kinds. I started on a lot of more solid food, especially as sort of the ones I was doing before were a little bit longer ultras. But actually, I've gone to a bit more simple foods now because it's easier to take on the move. But obviously that is something that needs to be tested. Sitting with gels, many gels on the stomach isn't going to work for everybody. But just thinking about what works for you and how you can take it on. The other thing to really think about is in the research now, it's saying that you have a more draw to savoury foods towards the end of a race, or as the period of time gets longer, you have more of a draw to savoury food rather than sweet food. So have you got enough variety in your testing and what you've tested and what you're carrying in order to meet that? Because what you have in hour one might be not what you fancy after 24 hours of running.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need to meet those energy demands.